So now, last but not least, Michael Tan. He has a very long CV, but I can just say that he's an anthropologist, PhD from the University of Amsterdam, medical anthropology, but he started as a veterinary, actually, and then now he is the Chancellor of the University of the Philippine Diliman, and since 2014. Yeah, so he is in a very respectable position at the university and influencing a lot of young minds. Yeah. A lot of young minds. But the title of his presentation is very interesting, Translating the Clitoral Complex. I don't know how many chancellor would be able to choose such a title, so for sure he's a special person. Please, Michael.
Thank you, Leah. Can someone... Good morning. I wanted to start out by saying it's good to be back. I have not been attending reproductive health conferences for a number of years. And I come today still straddling two worlds, the world of the academe and the world of NGOs. I have maintained my contact. And this particular title, as Leah said, it's intriguing. You know, I have yet to run into anyone in the academe or in the NGOs who knows what this term is, which I think is all the more reason to talk about it. This was originally intended to be in another plenary session on educational institutions. Naturally, they thought I should talk in that session, but I got moved to this first session, and I said I should retain it because the mystery around the clitoral complex is actually a very good example of the obstacles that we have. I'm going to skip the first slide very quickly, so pretend you didn't see it. Okay, we go to this. I realize I should not have put that first slide. Why are we going to be looking into translation? Anthropologists love to look at languages, and we look at translations, but there is an Italian saying that says traduttore, traditore, which means translators are usually traitors. I'm sorry to those who are translating right now, but we all know it's very difficult to translate precisely. And this is especially the case for terms related to sex and sexuality, and that even if we all speak in English, there are also speech communities in terms of those English speakers. When you talk about lay people, there's a difference in male talk and female talk. There's a difference in class. And even among professionals, and this is why I thought we should bring this up, there is a world of sexologists, and we have not usually worked with them because we're in SRH, but I would like to urge a rethinking of this. We have to be communicating with each other. We also know, for example, the OB/GYN people are not usually talking with people who work with STIs. So there are worlds apart in here, which make translation important. The other thing here is that when we talk about translations, we should not just be talking about words, but the context in which these words are exchanged. And that is what I hope to do today to some extent in relation to the clitoral complex. And then finally, I wanted to talk about translations. Business people now talk about translation in terms of minds to markets, meaning if you have innovation up here, what does that mean for the market? That's not my world, and I suspect that's not your world as well. But for us who are involved in medicine, there is something called translational medicine, which means all the work around laboratory research. Is it going to move from the bench, which means laboratory research, to the bedside, which means medical practice here? But later I will talk about another bedside. Now the rationale for this, there's a tendency to think when we think of, in fact the theme of this session is overcoming social, cultural, and religious barriers, and we tend to think that the problem is social, culture, and religious versus science. But I want to show today that there are problems as well in that medicine and science should also sometimes be thought of as culture. It is shaped by traditions, and it interacts with traditions sometimes to keep traditions going. And I hope that we can address that gap when it comes to the clitoral complex. Okay, what are we going to be doing here? I'm going to do very quick, just to show what we can do to look at translation and the gaps. I'm going to do a very quick language survey. I just discovered Google Translate. Now, I knew about it years ago, but it's a horrible instrument. Apparently, they've refined it, and you might want to look and use it, but use it with care, because they sometimes have very funny translations there. But for this particular case, I thought it would be useful to look at how two words, the penis and the clitoris, are translated in various languages. I'm also going to be doing some visual imagery here, analyzing the visual imagery around the clitoris. We Filipinos call it clitoris, but I have to learn how to pronounce it as clitoris. No? And we'll be doing critical discourse analysis, meaning who is saying what about the clitoris. This is too long to go into. If you're interested, there is Etymon line which tells you the origins of words. No? But just very quickly, one interesting theory is that clitoris comes from the Greek word for key. It's a key. No? Okay. There are Chinese words in here, so our delegates from China and those who recognize, you will recognize the words. In Japanese, you have the inke, but the Japanese being Japanese, they borrow a lot of English words. It's also called the penisu, no? And the clitoris is the kuritorisu, no? So that is English just Japanified. No? I'm not going to go again one by one, but I don't know if you start noticing Google Translate has, in Hindi, penis is translated as ling, and the clitoris is this very long word. I do not want to massacre words here. In Urdu, which is really closely related, some people say it's the same as Hindi, the penis, there's a word, but for clitoris, Google will give you clitoris. So our Pakistani delegates, I'd appreciate knowing what word you use there. I'm sorry the fonts are not coming out. In Tamil, again, you do the Google Translate. The word for clitoris is very, very long. No? Okay. Southeast Asia, closer to home, if you do Google Translate in Bahasa Indonesia, there's no translation for penis. Penises don't exist in Indonesia, no? But but of course it exists, no? And the clitoris kalantit. And in Malaysia, there is penis which is sakar, and we know it's actually sakar as well there. No? And then in Thai, in Burmese. No? But I did want to talk a bit about Filipino. The penis is titi and clitoris. Google translates as clitoris. And we don't use that word. No? We use tinggil. No? And in Cebuano, it's the same thing. The penis is oten, so a transgender, a bayot, is a woman with an oten, babaeng may oten, which is transgender. Ilocano, the penis is buto, which is the word for a bone as well. And in the online dictionary, there is no definition of clitoris. And I asked my driver, who is Ilocano, and he said it's mani, which means peanut. No? So I think you begin to see the pattern here, that there's much more than the penis. The clitoris is not talked about, but if you look at the street language, it is there. It just hasn't made it into Google Translate. Look at the difference also. If you use Google Translate, you'll find in Vietnamese, look at all the words for the penis, and look at the words for the clitoris. Okay, and I will ask our Vietnamese delegates to tell me if there are more to add in clitoris and for penis later on. Okay. So, that very quick linguistic survey tells us that even at the level of language, as it's spoken, there's reluctance to talk openly about the clitoris, much more than about the penis. When I asked my driver, he was almost embarrassed. He said, "Why are you asking?" I said, "I'm presenting it in a scientific conference." And that assured him that it was okay. Okay. And yet, when you look at cultures, it seems that people do recognize the clitoris and that it is embedded in many aspects of culture. Look at this plant. Many of you will recognize it. The botanical classification, there's a whole family called Clitoria, because the flowers resemble the clitoris. And this particular one in Filipino is called pukingan, and also sometimes puki ng reina, which means a queen's puki. Okay? And if you look closely, do you see the resemblance now? Yeah. And here on the right as well. And it's used as food. It's used as food in Malaysia and Thailand. There are a lot of medicinal claims now for various plants from this family. So this is part, again, of a survey that should be expanded, that culturally, people in folk culture, you do recognize the clitoris. I mean, that they saw it in a plant and gave it a name, a common name, and that the botanists, who are not the most exciting people, also saw the resemblance and created the whole family. Okay. We know that in art as well. Goodness, I found out about the Venus of Urbino and Olympia in an obstetrics book, an OB-GYN book. I'll give you the entry later on. And the discussion said that in these two paintings, if you look at it, the women here there's a suggestion that the fingers are doing something to the clitoris, but there's a difference there. The Venus of Urbino has a dog on her bed, and the dog is a symbol of loyalty. So she is a loyal woman, but her fingers are in her clitoris. Olympia, on the other hand, has a cat on the bed, and the interpretation, a cat is a symbol of prostitution or of sex work. So two very different paintings, but with, thank you for dimming the light, so it's clear enough for you to see, indicating again a recognition of the clitoris and whatever you want to draw out of it. But we also see in folk culture that there's a fear of the clitoris. We know of genital mutilation and female genital cutting. No need to go into details, but there's a very interesting insight from an anthropologist who worked with the Rendille of Africa and says there's more to this than controlling female sexuality. She says also the foreskin of a man is considered a female part and therefore has to be excised. And for the female, the covering of the clitoris is the male part and therefore has to be excised as well. The Rendille do excision of the hood, not the complete, the level 3 for WHO, which is the most severe, which is the excision of the clitoris itself. We know too, in England in 1918, there was a member of parliament who said there was a German plot to corrupt the British because there was an actress who had performed a dance in Oscar Wilde's Salome, and he claims that the name of the group was the Cult of the Clitoris. The Germans were going to take over Britain by corrupting people through the clitoris, through clitoral stimulation. You can look this up for more details. We also see a medicalization of the clitoris in the West. In the 19th century, hysteria was actually I think I misspelled it. Hysteria in women was actually seen as a complication of sexual frustration, and what you needed to do, the treatment, was manual clitoral and vaginal stimulation using vibrators. So vibrators were actually medically designed. Up to the Second World War, they were still being sold. We're all familiar with the debates on orgasms and Freud claiming that there's the clitoral and vaginal orgasm, and that clitoral orgasm was immature compared with vaginal orgasm because vaginal orgasm involved the male. If a woman does it alone, it's immature. But if you bring in the man, then it's the correct orgasm. And then, of course, there's the search for the G-spot. I'm sorry for the typos. My point here is that the clitoris has been medicalized and masculinized. If you look at the definitions in dictionaries, look at it. A small erectile female organ located with the anterior junction, develops from the same embryonic mass of tissue as the penis and responsive to sexual stimulation. Small, but it will become clearer in a while. There you are. Our doctors here probably took this in embryology. Remember, the fetus differentiates at some point. And really what sticks in your mind is that if there's no testosterone production, then there's no penis. So the clitoris is a potential that did not become because you did not have the testosterone. This is something we have to be conscious about, because when you discuss it in medical schools, you have to be able to take it a step further. Notice too, and I thought that this is such a good opportunity to talk about our family planning charts, which we get from the medical books. No wonder students fall asleep, and also your family planning methods. And I always compared, this is what we show people when we talk about family planning. So the female anatomical system looks like clothing on a laundry line. I always said, nakasampay. It's just a total distortion of what you have. And notice, there's no clitoris in there, right? It disappears. And look at the male. I don't know how to describe it. It looks like an insect. That's the male, on the right. My point again is you can look at textbooks and look at our family planning materials and see how the clitoris is reduced or disappears completely, while you have a concentration. What's happening here is you concentrate on reproduction. Okay? And we'll see that it's... Look at the sagittal view, also most exciting, right? Again, no wonder students fall asleep. Oh, did you notice? I had to use this. This is from Mosby. They actually put a compass there. Do you see the compass there? To tell you where's north, south, east, and west, no? I found that so amusing, that they had to orient you just in case you didn't know which was north, south, east, and west. Okay. Now, the clitoral complex has been making it into some newspapers because they said that there's a certain bias. The male anatomy is better known than the female anatomy. And they said this was an example also of the neglect of female anatomy. But it turns out as early as 1844, G.L. Coblet did research based on dissection and had this, which is quite, meaning it goes beyond the idea of the clitoris as a button, right? That's the concept most people. It's an external thing, a button. But Cobelt in 1844 already had very good dissection. But you don't read about Cobelt. There's a whole Cobelt's plexus, in fact, named after him. It's somewhere in there. And an Australian physician, her name is going to come up in a while, in 2006 in a BBC interview said that it's time to think more about the clitoris. The clitoris is not an external button. It's the whole vaginal wall is the clitoris. There's an external and internal. And she says that one reason why it's neglected is because there's a rivalry of sexes. One sex is sexual and the other is reproductive. Guess which is sexual? The male, and the female is reproductive. So the imagery emphasizes the reproduction for women, and for the male, it's more of the sexual. And of course, we know today the clitoris is very sexual. It is the only organ, that's the claim in some textbooks, that is there for pleasure alone. The penis is for pleasure and for reproduction. Okay, there's Helen O'Connell. She's Australian and she's been doing a lot of work. And between 1998 and the present, there has been much more work on the anatomy of the clitoris. And then the question now is, why is it not getting into schools and into our programs? Okay, this is one example of an MRI, but it took an artist to make it a bit clearer, and you're going to see how it looks in a while. Okay, there's actual MRI to show the clitoris in a flaccid and in an erectile position. So the clitoris, when you look at the pictures, you do see that it is really the homologue of the penis. But how many books have these depictions? A lot of the work is looking for female orgasm in the G-spot. In case this was actually taken during coitus, during intercourse, this is really the most exciting photograph you can imagine, right? I never thought I'd see a picture like this and say, my goodness, what is that? So that is supposed to show that the clitoris, the vagina actually expands during intercourse, and a lot of things happen with the clitoris. Okay, I finally found a book. It's a classic in medical textbook. Medical schools use Noble and Neal's Physiology of Reproduction. And in the 4th edition, in 2015, they finally got it right. Do you see the clitoris now? It's on the bottom left side. That is what the clitoris is. And to make it clearer, there's a stylized version here, and I was rather amused because the author here said, the real one does not glow in the dark, just in case people think and say, oh no, mine doesn't glow this way. So you see, now how complicated it is. The button, the clitoral body is the button we see. That's external. Everything else is internal. So how many of you discussed the clitoral complex? There it is. You see, are you able to position it now? Okay. And, okay, I'm going to, because I only have, you know, the time is limited. What does this all mean? The implications here is that in sexuality education, we need to talk about the clitoral complex. There's actually the full world now. It's the clito-urethral vaginal complex, CUV. That's a lot of words for Scrabble, but I think clitoral complex is fine. And what you see there is actually used now. It's a 3D printout that's being used for French schools for sexuality education. And when I showed it to my engineering students, they were just so thrilled that they gave me one. This is what it looks like. I said, can't you do it in maroon like this? Because the color of the University of the Philippines is maroon. Can you do it in our school color? And they didn't have time to make it maroon, so we have a black one. So I've been going around asking people, what do you think this is? So I get answers like butterfly, bird, penguin. And I think it's a good way to start discussions. And I've actually said now, because they said it looks like a bird, I say, this is the ibon ni Eva, meaning this is the bird of Eve. If Adam had a bird, Eve has a bird as well, and it's certainly more impressive, right? Don't you think? I'm going to have them make one of the penis so you can show, you hold the penis here and you hold the clitoral complex here. Okay. So many of you are probably familiar with the work of Suzanne Gage, where she did, in fact, have artist renditions many years ago, which shows a more powerful clitoris. Here again, I have to edit this a bit, but when you get this, in case you want to print your own, you can get it from Thingiverse, and you can print it out. It takes 4 hours to print out one without the coloring. Okay. Another implication here is bench to bedside, and when I say bedside now, we're talking about sex, bedroom. Now that we recognize that what the clitoral complex is, there's so many implications, and they're talking about how the female condom can actually be used to stimulate. There are, again, the business people are more advanced than we are in SRH. They're developing new toys based on the clitoral complex, the one on the right. But you notice again, this is something that irritates me with our sexual and reproductive health materials. They tell you this is the way you use a condom, and they don't have hands. There's no one. It's like the condom slides into people from heaven or somewhere. And look at that as well. There's your hanging fallopian tubes again in the female condom. We really have to look at our materials and see why do people disappear. Okay, that's it. There are implications for gynecology. One of the guys who did the work on the clitoral complex, he was actually a surgeon who was doing a lot of work to repair FGM, female genital mutilation, and realized he needed to know more about the anatomy, and this is why he went into that research. I found articles on the forensics in rape cases, and people don't ask if the clitoris was injured in the process, and yet it is so highly innervated, one can imagine that forced intercourse would be terribly traumatizing for the clitoris. And in general, a better understanding of sexual pleasure and satisfaction. In that textbook, Principles of Reproductive Physiology, I don't know if you were aware that we've moved beyond Masters and Johnson's EPOR model, of refraction and all that. They actually have a new one now that talks about wanting, liking, and learning. And the findings in the clitoral complex allows us now to graph it out and talk about how it is actually a cycle, that the pleasure you get actually gives you the incentive for sex and finding ways to improve on the sex. And it ties in also with clitoral stimulation. There are implications for the guys as well. Guys have been just so fixated on penetration. Terrence is here, did a lot of work on penile implants and in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand. All of that is based on the idea that you need to pleasure the woman through the vagina, when in fact it's the clitoris that you need to be working on. But there are also amazing studies now that say perhaps Freud was wrong, the G-spot doesn't exist, that you're talking a whole lot of different types of orgasms, many of which are tied to the clitoris, but not solely to the clitoris, because the clitoris is outer and internal. We should talk also again about the normative. We've been railing against female genital mutilation, but in 2010, Reproductive Health Matters had this, I was still on the advisory board, and we had debates on whether we should put this on the cover. The cover are photographs of different vaginas, and it's also important for our sexuality education to let girls, especially young girls, know that vaginas look different. There's great variation, and it is wonderful variation in here. Because in the States today, there's a lot of concern about growing normativity, so that you have young girls who say, my vagina and my clitoris does not look right, and therefore we need surgery on the clitoris. There's clitoral hood reduction. I don't know if it's happening now in Southeast Asian countries, but it's part of this idea that we need to deal with the clitoral complex and get young people to understand what you have is usually not a problem. No? It's society that makes it a problem. No? So Leah talked about worlds apart. I think sometimes we are also words apart. No? This is from Australia. You Australians have so much going on in there. No? So they recently had I can't remember the affair there. It's in the caption, and there's the woman holding something up. Look at the. It was called a glitoris, not a clitoris, because it's gold, no? So it glitters, no? And one can imagine how I think you can get away with this in most of our Southeast Asian countries, because the imams and the authorities would not know what's going on there, and our priests and our pastors and our. So let's play on this, no? Yeah. So. Thank you for the time given to this discussion.